If you've ever wondered how to write a difficult family history without getting into a quagmire, this video is for you. While the topic referenced in my video is a public trauma, know this video is not political. I'm using a public current event because it's safer than just dissecting private trauma and all the legalities that come into play when you're talking about living people. While the video's title is intriguing and probably made you click, let me state that the principles in this video apply to many situations. Something public like the Challenger explosion, Vietnam War, 9/11. Community trauma like floods, earthquakes, and riots, or it applies to stories of people who were survivors of abuse, addiction, neglect, or other harm. And then even family breakups and other struggles. So specifically, we're going to be watching a few clips from one eyewitness who experienced and talking about his experiences of being in a pretty traumatic event from 2025, teaches us about drafting and then revising sensitive stories. Step one is to tell the story any way it comes out. No filter, no worrying about order of events, no worrying about the audience. Just get the story out of your head and onto a page, or even in a recording like what we're going to see here in a moment, because this is exactly what Brandon did on a YouTube channel. So let's dive into some clips and learn how to write about those difficult family and personal history topics.
I went to the school with my buddy. His name's Steven. I'm so glad he was there. We arrived like 3 hours early, so that we could be as close as possible to the debates that he was going to have.
Notice how Brandon demonstrates the principle of just get it out. When we tell stories, we start with basic storytelling principles. You've known these from elementary school: who, what, when, where, why, and how. For Brandon, who was his buddy Steven, where was the University of Utah, when they arrived 3 hours early on that fateful day in September, and why did they get there 3 hours early? Because they wanted to be close to the debates. So he's not trying to structure a story. It emerges organically, and that is the first step to writing your traumatic family stories. Whether you pen it or whether you tell it to a person or just to a video camera and audio recorder, tell the story organically.
And the assassination takes place, and I'm just completely confused for what feels like a full 5 minutes, but it actually was only just 1 second or 1 or 2 seconds. Right when it happened, right after I heard the bullet or the shot, and that's it, and in that moment, and a lot of people who were there really relate to this. I've talked to a lot of people who were there. We all thought it was like a prank.
So one of the things that I'm noticing that Brandon is doing as he's trying to tell his story is he's censoring himself. He's kind of saying, well, we thought this and we thought that. And I like that he said, time slowed down and we were confused. All of that belongs in your story, and that matters. If you go back and watch the full clip, he talks about how he filtered out and withheld some of the things that he felt and saw that day because he was sharing this story publicly online for total strangers. And that's completely fine and understandable. But when you're writing for yourself and for your future generations, don't hold back when you're drafting. You can always decide later what gets shared, but I really want you not to hold back. I don't want you to filter yourself. But if you do find yourself kind of psychoanalyzing your experience while you're sharing it, that's okay. Run with it. But eventually, Just tell us how you felt and what you saw and what you heard. Now, I want to revisit a few moments in this clip.
It is a traumatic thing, but it doesn't consciously register that. So subconsciously, like time slowed down. That's and in that moment, and a lot of people who were there really relate to this. I've talked to a lot of people who were there. We all thought it was like a prank. That it was some sick joke. In that one subconscious second of confusion, we were like, that's an absurd amount of blood.
One of the things I want to highlight is that sensitive stories should include your thought process, especially your early erratic thoughts, because the thought process humanizes your experience. Humans experience shock and they all react a little bit differently. And so what you're going to be doing when you're talking about sensitive stories, especially firsthand accounts or firsthand accounts from diaries, journals, and other recordings that you may have for your ancestors, is you want to show how trauma unfolds in real time. And that whatever reaction you has is likely very, very normal. He said, I thought it was a prank. It was a ridiculous amount of blood. Those thoughts are normal reactions for many people. So remember, thought process humanizes your stories. So capture that.
Until I dropped on the ground with everybody instinctively, like I didn't even tell myself to drop to the ground. I just dropped to the ground along with everybody. And that's when it kind of sunk in that he had just been shot and that wound was an incredibly bad wound.
So what I like in his retelling of the story is he hears this sound and he thinks it's some kind of practical joke. And then you see how his thinking involves his behavior response. He's initially very disbelieving, and when that realization that this is something bad. I can relate to this even though I wasn't even there, and even though I watched some of the sanitized versions of what happened. To hear him talk about his thought process, it's really powerful, because what it does is it shows that trauma thinking is fast and it's not linear. So it's entirely possible he hears the shot, wait, that sounds like a panic. And then people hit the ground instinctively. And then he starts responding and his brain is rapid fire. And this is all happening in a matter of seconds. But have you ever had that experience when time slows down? Exactly. And so when you're writing sensitive stories, you want to show just how nonlinear and quick your brain is going and your body is responding, and yet it's slow at the same time. This is exactly the kind of details people cut out of their stories because they think they're being irrational, but they really, really shouldn't.
My mind started racing and I started thinking, he just shot Charlie. He's going to start shooting the people in the crowd. I'm right there up close. If there's any other people he's going to be aiming for, it's probably going to be the crowd that I'm in. Like, I tensed my body up, preparing for a bullet to pierce me.
Oh my gosh.
Even though, again, irrational, like tensing
up. Kind of, but not.
We'll come back to that last sentiment in a moment. But in that moment, he thought his life was going to end. He names his fear. Brandon names his physical reaction, that tensing up. Can you feel it? I mean, I can, and I can probably relate. He lets us into his body. He lets us into his mind. He lets us into his emotion. And that's why firsthand accounts are really, really powerful of traumatic stories. And remember, tie this back to the topics I said at the beginning. It doesn't necessarily have to be a political assassination. But I can think back to the day when 9/11 happened. I remember the office I was in when my father-in-law called me and said, hey, get to a television, watch the news. I remember that I was 6 months pregnant And I remember being afraid that my husband wasn't going to make it home because there were a plane crashed in Pennsylvania. And my husband was in Pennsylvania, and I didn't know the geography of where he was. This is what makes a story relatable without being graphic. I mean, it is graphic, the tensing of the body, the fear, but we don't have to talk about all the gory details that he witnessed.
But before we realized there were no more shots, as soon as that went through my mind that I could be shot, the first thing that I did was I texted Kayla, my wife, and I just said, "There's a shooter and I love you." And my hands were shaking as I was sending that text.
This is an emotional turning point for me in this story, and it chokes me up every time I hear him talk about this. We're inside what he thinks could be his final moment. Sure, that's the shot stopped. But the next fear was, wait, are they going to shoot when we try to scramble and we try to get out of here? Is there going to be something worse? His focus then goes to his relationship, one of the most important relationships, that of his wife. This is the kind of connection future generations is going to cling to. And since I mentioned 9/11, think about "Let's roll." That infamous text after the man texted his wife, "I love you, the plane's going down, but I'm going to take these people out. Let's roll." When you have the traumatic stories, and then you have these moments where people think about their family members, you really need to include them, because powerful stories aren't always just about dates. It's not about headlines. It's about Brandon's love for his wife. Step 2 is to revise the story. Now, as I talk about revision, recognize I'm not criticizing Brandon and the telling of a story. I am trying to help teach you how to preserve your stories, make it clear and powerful and preserved for future generations. So let's go back to a couple clips of what Brandon says and what we're going to do to revise them.
Confusion. We were like, that's an absurd amount of blood. That's like the person who came up to the mic to debate him has just been talking about shootings. So this has to be some sort of like sick way of getting the message across about shooting, which that's completely irrational now.
Yeah.
Thinking about it, but that's what went through my mind in the moment.
So he tells his story, and there's something I'm going to recommend that he pulls out if he was going to revise it for posterity. See if you can guess what it is. It shows up again in this clip, so see if you can pick it up.
The people in the crowd, I'm right there up close. If there's any other people he's going to be aiming for, it's probably going to be the crowd that I'm in. Like, I tensed my body up preparing for a bullet to pierce me.
Oh my gosh.
Even though, again, irrational. Like,
I mean,
tensing up.
kind of, but not really. Like, I can totally understand why your brain would go to that. But.
Yeah.
I want to thank the host, Jackson, for saying it's not irrational. That matters. Whether you're Brandon or you're somebody talking about 9/11 and my irrational fear that my husband is going to be harmed just because he happens to be in Pennsylvania, they're not irrational. They're normal thoughts. And if you were in Brandon's shoes, don't you think you would have all the thoughts and do all the actions or something similar? Yeah, I think you will. So when we are revising our stories so that we can publish them and share them for our posterity, I would say that we need to keep a reader in the moment of the event. Don't add hindsight commentary as you're sharing the story, because it takes us out of the scene. We want to be inside the scene with you. Why? Well, because Brandon didn't think those thoughts were irrational while he was having them. His brain and his body was trying to keep him safe. Later, he reflects on things and then starts to think, oh, that was kind of irrational, right? You can have that rumination. It actually is part of your story. Place it later. The key takeaway for family historians writing about sensitive stories is that traumatic stories have two timelines: the event and then the rumination after it. So when you're writing, when you separate the event from the following rumination, that will make your narrative incredibly powerful. Now, while we're talking about rumination, here's another thing that happens in this interview that we as family historians can learn about and incorporate it into our writing.
Imagine being in that experience, dude. And for you, I guess, in the aftermath of that, when did it kind of hit you that, like, this is something that I want to be a different man because of?
Yeah. I mean, I think that night, after it finally settled in, I didn't feel safe in my own home. For some reason, I was really, well, not for some reason, I think it's clear. Like, I felt paranoid, especially because the shooter was still at large. And just when something like this happens, you just think irrational thoughts. And, like, I think I was thinking that maybe the shooter was coming for me next, just because I believed in what Charlie Kirk was.
So Brandon hasn't answered the interviewer's question, which is okay in this format, right? This is kind of a first draft telling of his experience. And so that's great. Wait for the answer.
So I went home and just, like, cried to my family, and I just felt it all hit me, like, this thing that just happened is going to change you and the world forever. That's what I felt the Spirit tell me. So that transformation began that night. I felt a calling to be more upfront about my beliefs, more vocal about the gospel of Jesus Christ, with the people that I was with on social media. And that was, like, kind of the first change that happened. Was life is not a game. Life is not something to just coast through and be complacent in. This mortality, this probation that we are in, as Alma talks about, is a time for us to come to know God, to become as close as we can like the Savior, to be ye therefore perfect. Seeing his last moments in mortality, I realized the kind of man he was, and that he obtained an incredible set of qualities and characteristics and character that I wanted to obtain. And then it just reminded me of my dad and my grandpa and other people in my life who have obtained these characteristics that are so close to Christ, but they're not perfect. But these are people that I can look to as examples, while knowing that the eternal goal is Jesus Christ, is becoming like him. And that kind of changed it for me. It became less overwhelming to think that I could be perfect like Christ, and that I can look to these mentors, these people in my life who are close to Christ's perfection. At least I think so. And strive for that myself. And so that's what I tried to do.
Most powerful family stories have a turning point. And what Brandon was sharing and answering in this moment was a potential turning point in his life. Now, turning points are harder to find in our ancestor stories unless we have some of those written accounts from in their own voice or in what they say. But for Brandon, this experience was a turning point. He wanted to do two things. He wanted to be more open about his views, and then he wanted to utilize mentors to try to become like his goal is to be like his savior. Now, remember, on this channel, I'm not preaching to you, but religion is a major factor in many of ours and our ancestors' lives. And we want to include these spiritual experiences, these spiritual turning points, and we want to incorporate the thought process. And what's going to happen later is not only is Brandon currently having a worldview shift and he's clarifying some of his values, but this turning point implies that future behavior should also change. So that is his story arc, the shift of worldview and the behavior that follows. And then from this sensitive story, we can then continue on with his life and see if it created the change that he thought it would. And if we were to write the story of Brandon, we could actually start about how his life changed the day that he was at this tragic event. Then we can go back and talk about his early life and experiences that led him to this transformative experience, and then follow up after. And that's the beautiful part of revising your personal stories. You can use these sensitive experiences to connect with your posterity. You can share your worldview shifts, and then your actions should hopefully correlate with that shift. I know when I talk about my pageant experiences, it wasn't exactly traumatic, but it was a turning point. My last year of competing in pageants as an adult or young woman, I lost every single event I was in. Every single one. I didn't place. I didn't get high marks on anything. It was as if I was competing my first year knowing absolutely nothing. And then my mom gave me an opportunity to do the Miss KIKK rodeo pageant for the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo. All I had to do was wear cowboy boots and a hat and model. I thought, well, surely I can do that. But I will tell you, when I was announced as a semifinalist at 15 or 17, I was the last one called, and I was called out as a tie for not 15th, not 16th, but 17th. And the announcer had me shaking in my boots the whole dang time. But when I was called to the semifinal, I leaped onto the stage because it had been a very painful year. I'm not equating it to what happened to Charlie Kirk, don't get me wrong. But for me, this was a turning point. I saw my worth again. And then I advanced to the top 5. I was the last one called again. That announcer drove me nuts. But it added drama, I guess, or at least for me. And then when I was announced as the second runner-up, you have never seen a happier second runner-up in my life. In your life. You've never seen a happier second runner-up. I was so happy because I knew my backstory. Now, is this the most amazing story? No, but it was a turning point. I never did another pageant after that. I went out on top, so to speak, but I found my worth again. And believe it or not, I knew that my savior loved me, my family loved me, and I had value whether I had a crown or not. So when you are writing about your sensitive stories, be they small or large, be they incredibly graphic and disturbing, or be they something that you experience with the community, watching the Challenger explosion, watching 9/11. And for some of us, 9/11 was more close to home than the rest of us. Take the time to tell it like it is, get it out, and then revise it. Because as family historians, we document private pain. We can also document public tragedies that we experienced. And it's also important to incorporate shared moments because that's what makes us human. And that's what makes our stories powerful. My final tip maybe is our goal is not to sensationalize a story. I didn't think that Brandon's account was sensationalist. Sure, it grabbed people's attention because it was a major story of 2025, but it was a human experience. And so our goal is not to sensationalize things, but to humanize the experiences. Sensitive stories matter because they make our ancestors and ourselves real. We're flawed, we're scared, sometimes we're courageous, and yeah, we're irrational at times because all humans are. If you've avoided writing the most difficult stories in your family tree or your own personal life, I hope you now see some tools and some strategies to accomplish this painful yet rewarding task. If you need help knowing the next right step in writing, let me know in the comments below. And if the story is too personal to share in a YouTube comment, then please reach out to me via my website, which I promise to link in the description box below. Thanks for watching, and I hope that you've learned a few things. See you next time.